All right. I trust that Sean last week filled in for me. I had to go help my son, and you can tell me whether he did or not. There was one parable about the laborers, and another parable then about the story of the mother of the two apostles who wanted her sons to be on the right and left of Jesus. And the whole lesson was part of a series that we're going to talk about discipleship. Now, as you know, as you read through the Gospels, Jesus had lots of discussions. I mean, he had discussions with people that he met along the side of the road. He had discussions with the common people. He had discussions and encounters with the Jewish leaders, with the Sadducees, Pharisees, and so on. He had discussions with his disciples. And of course, each of the discussions dealt sometimes with different subjects. But as we look in Matthew right here, what I'm trying to do with these series of lessons is to take a series of discussions that he had with his disciples that focus on the idea of discipleship, what it means, and in their lives, and how that ties in what he's been telling them. Now, up to the point where we are today in this lesson, or these series of lessons, on 3 different occasions, Jesus has talked to them and told them what's going to happen to him, that he's going to be taken, he's going to be handed over, he's going to be killed, and he will die. And he's told them what's going to happen. And they just don't seem to get it. And they still have questions. And so we're looking at those questions because what's going to happen to him and what he's going to tell them that's going to affect their life after he's gone is part of the whole idea of his second coming, when he comes again. And that's basically where we're headed for the 4 weeks. So today, let's look at, we're going to start with Matthew chapter 24 at the very beginning. And in Matthew 24, it's a pretty long chapter. We'll get through some of it, and I'll make some references to some other scripture. But we'll probably finish 24 and get into 25 next week. And but we're going to stay mainly in Matthew. Now that doesn't mean that some of these conversations are not in Luke or Mark or the other gospel books, but we're going to look at starting with verse 1. And because this is such a long chapter, I mean, there's 51 verses. We won't take the time to read all 51 verses, but I'm going to allude to them. And you can look at them as we're discussing and talking.
It doesn't look like you have an application.
That reminds me of me doing a prayer not long ago up at the pulpit. And Siri talked to me in the middle of prayer.
Doesn't make much sense for you.
No. Well, she did that time. I said, oh no, I don't want to get into it. What we're looking at here in chapter 24 is a teaching event in the life of Jesus that he's using. And in the first, I will take time to go through the first 3 verses. It says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. I tell you the truth, Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so the disciples pull him aside and they say, look at this temple. Look at this building, how great this building is. And he dismisses it. And he says, in effect, this building is of no importance. To them, it was like the eighth wonder of the world. They were showing their pride in that building, in that temple. And so he begins to talk to them about this temple thing. And pretty much he's what he's going to say in this is that what you have right now is a temple-based religion. I mean, that's what you turn to, the temple. We have to go to the temple. And he's letting them know that that temple is not going to be there. So they have this temple-based theology that they're looking at. And it's even a warning to us today, I think, as disciples. I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit. You know, lots of times we have the idea that if I go to church and I'm at church, then I'm doing what I should do as a disciple of Christ. And he's saying it's not the building. And what I was trying to get at last week in the lesson is discipling is a vocation. Discipling is something you live every day. Discipling is what you do where your feet are. You don't just disciple on Sundays and Wednesdays. You disciple every day of your life. And that's what he's kind of saying to them there. He says, they don't get it. He knows that. And they even pull him aside on the Mount of Olives. And he says, and they ask him again what the signs are. Now, I'm going to look for a minute. If you want to go to this, you can follow it. But in Zechariah chapter 14, 1 through 5, there's a reference there to the Mount of Olives. And the actual thing that we're going to look at in Zechariah is that the Lord comes and reigns. This is Old Testament now. A day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azel. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. And so we're looking here in Zechariah at a prediction, a prophecy. And this, I guess, is kind of a ironic thing that they're asking him this very thing on the Mount of Olives, where that's where Zechariah is saying, all this is going to take place. He's going to come back to the Mount of Olives. And here they are sitting next to him and saying, what's the sign? What's going to happen? And if they were the used to the Old Testament like they should be, now he can criticize the religious leaders, the ones who were supposed to know the Old Testament and identify who the Messiah is, but they didn't even get that. The apostles, we may be able to say, okay, well, maybe they didn't know the Old Testament well enough to recall this, and they may not see the irony that they're asking him about this very thing on the place that it's foretold in the Old Testament. So God's plan is taking place here. Now, I want to talk about the destruction of the temple because that's what we're going to look at in part of this chapter here. He's warning them. I'm going to jump ahead to verse 36. If you will, turn to verse 36. Remember, they just asked him for a sign. And they said, when's this going to happen? What is the sign going to be? And he says, no one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father, as it was in the days of Noah. So it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Now, he's warning them here. No one knows. And they had asked for a sign. And if we go back to chapter 16, and we didn't cover it in this class, but if we go back to chapter 16, he's already rebuked them and he's rebuked others for wanting a sign. In chapter 16, that we have the religious leaders who wanted a sign. And he's already on other occasions rebuked them for even asking for a sign. And as we look in chapter 24, he says, there isn't going to be a sign. Go down to, as we continue in 37. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Now, we'll get into the rest of this a little bit later. He's giving them clues about what it is that's going to happen. But go back a little bit earlier to verse 30 where he's talking to them. In verse 30, he says, at that time, I'm going to take the time to do this. If you go further earlier in the chapter, in verse 15, we'll start there. He says, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Now, he's giving us some hints here, and he tells them in Matthew chapter 24 that there will be no sign. And how many of you have traveled with children on a trip? What's the first thing that they say a couple of miles down the road? How are we going to get there? Yeah. And I know what if you didn't say it, you probably wanted to say it. We'll get there when we get there. You'll know it when we pull up and I get out of the car, we're there. Well, pretty much, that's what he's telling them. There isn't going to be a sign. When you see me coming, that's it. There's not going to be a sign. You can't prepare. You can't get ready. And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent. If we talk about discipleship being a vocation, something you do every day, no matter where you are, all the time, here's what I see happening lots of times, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, I guess. We have people, I used to work as a youth minister in Florida at church, and we'd go to youth rallies, and kids would get all fired up and they want to get baptized, and they were Christians. We had revivals that lasted 7 days, some of them longer. And they wouldn't stop singing that last song until at least 50 people came forward and declared their, right? We've all been to them, you know. We've all been to these things where they have mountaintop experiences, or they go forward out of guilt because they know that they're supposed to do this. What we have in that situation, when people go forward like that and say, I want to be baptized, that's a transactional activity. It's just something that you do. It's a transaction. I will do this in exchange for this. And I'm cheapening the baptism by saying that in a way. But I will go forward and I will confess, and in exchange, I will have the Holy Spirit. And right now, I'm going to tell you that should be a transformational process. It should be something where when they go down there, it transforms them into this disciple thing that we started with at the beginning of the series. Now, does that happen magically all at one time? No. How does that happen? Have you all been transformed? Are you done being transformed? No. Is it possible to be completely transformed before Jesus appears? Probably not. I don't think he can. We'd like to wish that we did. And some of us think we already have. You know, I run into those people at the church. And so we know that something's going to happen. And he starts to talk to them about, and he warns them, and he lets them know about the temple being destroyed in this chapter. Now, I know some of you are well read. Before I go into a lot of information about the destruction of the temple, anybody have information on it? Have you read on it? Do you know anything about it? Most of us know it happened.
70 AD.
70 AD, good.
But it wasn't accompanied by a sign, it was accompanied by it happening, just what you said a while ago.
Right.
The sign was, they're here.
That's right.
They're there.
Now, this is part of an ongoing war between the Jews and the Romans. And it actually lasted from about 66 to, I think, 73 AD. Now, if you take what Josephus wrote, who is a historian at the time and was actually part of both groups. He had been with the Jews and he was also Roman. If you take what he said, again, you're going to give me a chance to talk and tell the story, otherwise I'll keep yammering. According to Josephus, over 1 million people died because it happened at Passover. when all the Jews had come to Jerusalem for that celebration. Other historians and scholars seem to think that it might be less than that. But a lot of people there. Not only was it the Jews and the Romans, but there were a lot of other malcontents. And those malcontents tried to actually set fire to the temple. During the course of this battle, and it didn't happen in one day, they didn't just come in and it wasn't, what did George Bush say? All in shock and awe. Shock and awe. It wasn't a one-day deal. They had tried things like battering rams. They tried to build ramps up to the thing. And and what the people did was they sought refuge in the temple. When the Romans finally were able to break through, by that time, they had withheld food from the Jews for a long time. According to Josephus, the Jews had resorted to cannibalism. And I won't get into all the gory details of the stories of the cannibalism, but mothers were eating their babies. There were murders, there were rapes. Like I said, close to 1 million people died. They were burned to death. Beyond that, though, I want to read this from the Amorim, Amoraim, translates to those who say, or those who speak over the people. They were spokesmen. And they told the stories from the oral Torah. And they said, and this is Jews saying this, that the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem was punishment from God for the baseless hatred that pervaded Jewish society at the time. Many Jews in despair are thought to have abandoned Judaism for some time for a version of paganism because of what happened in Jerusalem in the temple. Many others sided with the growing sect within Judaism. The destruction of this temple was an important point in the separation of Christianity from its Jewish roots. Many Christians responded by distancing themselves from the rest of Judaism, as reflected in the Gospels, which some believe portray Jesus as anti-temple and view the destruction of the temple as punishment for rejection of Jesus. This is coming from those Amorims. This is the Jewish people who were seeing that. Now, it wasn't that Jesus was anti-temple. As much as it was, he was trying to prepare his disciples for what's to come. Now, he uses some verbiage and things when he's warning in verse 4, we're going to jump back to verse 4, he starts off warning them. And this is a series of warnings. As Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains." Now, we read this today because we know he's there. In one sense, he's talking about the destruction of the temple. And we look at it and we say, but it applies to us because Jesus has not come yet. There are wars and rumors of war. There is chaos, and we make that application to us. He's letting them know about what's going to happen to them in the next 40 years. He goes on to say, some of you will live to see this. And they do, because some of the gospel writers were writing after the temple was destroyed. They're writing their letters where they're telling about it. So they did live to see it. Now, what he uses the word there in some of your verses, like the one I said, he said, watch out that no one deceives you. And then a few lines down further, it says, but see to it that you are not alarmed. That see to it and that watch in the Greek are basically the same word. Now, I kind of like the word watch as a warning. See to it's kind of casual to me. And it's an NIV translation. Watch is more of an imperative word. It's a present tense imperative thing. Do it. Not just once. Do it. Be watchful constantly. Don't just watch and say, okay, I looked. There's no antichrist here. There's no false teachers. Got it. He said, this is something that can happen anytime, any day. Be careful with it. And he's warning them to watch out. And he says, again, to be on the watch. Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. Now, I'm gonna mess up the Greek on this thing. I'm not a Greek scholar, but the word that comes from planet is planetasius, Planetes. I'm pretty sure that's the right word. I do this from memory. Anyway, that word is the word for planet. And when he's saying, make sure that no one deceives you, when he's telling them to watch out, not to be fooled, don't be tricked, don't to be misled. The planets had a definite path. And he wants them to be constant. You know, you don't see planets wavering all over the universe. They don't just travel around crazy. They're in a circle. They're constant. And he wants them to be, he's using that word deliberately, I think. He wants them to be very, very steady and steadfast in watching out. Don't be misled. Don't wander around. He wants them to be stable disciples. Don't wander over here. And you've heard the scriptures about listening to people who want to tickle your ears. Don't wander over here where they tickle your ears and tell you what you want to hear. Don't go over here. Stay straight. Earlier in Matthew and the other Gospels, when he's giving the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about straight is the way and
Narrow is the gate.
the narrow gate,
Narrow.
and not
Narrow is the gate. That way leads to life eternal.
right. Salvation.
The Old Testament has about 75 times uses the phrase, neither to the right nor the left.
Right.
It comes up all the time. You're not better off if you're conservative than if you're liberal. If you're wrong, you're off the track.
Yeah.
So you don't go either way.
Exactly. And that's what he's trying to get across to them here, that there's going to be some things that's going to happen to them. Now, when he talks about the questions, and he's gonna talk about the abomination of the temple. And I'm gonna skip ahead here just a little bit. I lost my note. In the Old Testament, I didn't put my note in. Okay, in the Old Testament, there was a time when the temple was taken over, and the king, and I forgot his name. I'll think of it here in a minute. Boy, once you hit 70, everything is
No kid.
I get it. Anyway, and what he did was he put another altar where the temple altar was in the Old Testament, and he built a thing to Zeus, I believe. And what's going to happen here in this destruction of this temple, he said there's going to be abominations. And that's exactly what they did. You know what they did when they took over the temple? You know all the stuff behind the curtain for the Holy of Holies? They took that, picked it up, paraded it to Rome, and just desecrated it. And so it wasn't just, we're going to break down a building. This was at the root of their belief system. If you haven't picked up on it, you might, as you read through this, and I hope you would review it. He's telling them that there's going to be chaos in their world. The world is going to be chaotic. And we're going to get to this in a minute. He not only wants them to be straight and not deviate from what they're supposed to be doing and who they're supposed to be, but he's letting them know, number one, not to be afraid, don't be misled. He's trying to set the stage for them and say, there's going to be terrible things happen. There's going to be things that can scare you, but I want you to remain calm. Now, what does that tell us for today? What are we supposed to be? If he's telling his disciples, in a world full of chaos, wars and rumors of war, all those bad things, he wants them to be calm. He wants them to maintain this straight belief. He wants them to be disciples in the midst of this. He wants them to be the example that he needs them to be in this world. Do we do that? Does the Christian church in the Western Hemisphere carry that weight? I'm going to sound like a missionary right now. I don't think in the Northern Hemisphere, if you look at Europe in many ways is almost as godless as you can ask for. Yes, we have missionaries. We have somebody in Leicester, England. There are missionaries in places. But as a whole, the culture is godless.
Sorry. Our churches have been there since I was in 10, and in Norway and in Sweden and in Holland. They have little tiny churches of 5 people, and they've been preaching and holding meetings and handing out tracts for 70 years and haven't put it dead.
And we in America tend to think, and I'm getting on a soapbox now, we tend to think that the American church is to be the savior for the world, and that it's up to us to save and to teach. But if you pay attention to what's happening in the world on a mission level, on a discipling level, what's really happening in Africa? You can speak to that. They are hungering and thirsting for the word of the Lord. They're turning to God. They're not turning away like the Northern Hemisphere. South America, pretty much the same way. Southern Hemisphere, there seems to be a resurgence of seeking God. And I'm overgeneralizing, of course. But that maybe tells us something that we need to be doing different. Are we a church of the building? Or are we the church of disciples who are discipling where we need to be, wherever we are? Maybe we're not doing that as much. I apologize for this one off my way. I'm not even on the missions committee. I don't know why.
Did I read somewhere that Nigeria has more congregation of our brethren than we do in this country?
That's probably
I
right.
think I read that somewhere.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but yes, you're right. And that's just one country.
Yeah.
That's not even the whole continent. And it's kind of scary. But let's go on. In Matthew 24, verse 13, he says, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. He says, hang in there. What this verse doesn't say in our tradition of faith is that evangelical tradition thing that I was talking about. It doesn't, he's saying that we have to be true to this and be saved. It's not the transactional, it's the transformational. We have to hang in there and we have to be the disciple. That's what he's warning them to do and to be. If we look at verse 14, I didn't get to that earlier. Let's start 9. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to nations. Now, we tend to say, well, I think we're doing that because we send people out to all these different places. He's in verse 14, he's using what's called a future passive voice. This is a proclamation. He knows it's going to happen. It's already done. But it's what's going to be done to them. Remember, he said, this is going to happen to you. You will be persecuted. You will be. And so it's a passive thing. It's kind of like my marriage. It's what Nora does to me. You know, she gives me my allowance. No, I'm just kidding. If you need to get down the hallway and tell her I said all this.
She gives you permission to say you're the head.
She gives me permission to say that, yes. Now, he said, all this is going to happen, but it's God's doing. The chaos that you're going to see, all the persecution, all the things, the wars, and everything else is God's doing. It's something that he's doing for his ends. And you are going to suffer because of it. And that's why I want you to be strong in this. Does that make sense? We tend to not think about us being the passive recipients of those negative things. You know, lots of times when people say, why would God do that? Why does God allow that to happen? Why would those people be allowed in that country to do those terrible things? It is part of the plan. And Jesus even says here, these things will happen to you. And he hasn't come yet. So that doesn't mean that we're exempt. Just because the temple fell doesn't mean that, oops, all that's over. Whatever he said doesn't account for us anymore. Any questions or observations so far? I seem to be doing all the talking.
I have a question. It says here, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. So my question is, has that happened yet? Does the whole world know about Jesus?
I don't know that.
You see, because what I'm getting at is,
I mean, I know what you're saying.
yeah, what I'm getting at is, then the world can't know yet, because that's a promise that he made to us, that everybody's gonna know about it.
And that may be why it's 2021.
That's why I'm just asking about it, because,
But that doesn't mean that the chaos stops.
oh, no,
It doesn't mean that the persecution stops.
no.
And we don't know. And
And it says, and then the world, will end. And it says, then the end will come.
right,
So my mind is thinking, when the world does end, that's when everybody knew about Jesus or God. I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting off of this scripture. Because God makes promises, and his promises are,
at the risk of sounding like I'm, let me use the word chiding, that I'm calling you out on this. When you say, we haven't reached all the world, so therefore this did not happen. So when we reach all the world, then this will happen. Is that not, we've reached everybody, that's a sign it's gonna happen. And what did he just say about looking for signs? So I don't know that that could be a sign.
right.
Or if we say, okay, we got the last Yahoo down the street, and we just talking about Jesus.
But I don't think everybody's gonna know
Yeah.
when that happens, you know. But what I'm just referring to, God never failed a promise,
Right.
Well,
you know, so.
when you read Romans 1, it tells you that all mankind is without excuse. They know the Creator, God, the way the world functions and how nature goes about its business to keep the world turning and the oxygen and carbon dioxide level where both plants and animals can survive. But it says we're without excuse. Even though we've not heard of the Judeo-Christian religion, we still know that there is a God, there is a Creator, and that we're still supposed to worship Him and live a lifestyle that glorifies Him. And that's the main thing. We need to focus on Christ, and our lifestyle should glorify God because we're called Christians. Everything we do daily, the time we get up, the time we go to sleep, or maybe even are asleep, or you're dreaming bad dreams or whatever, but we still need to live a Christian life and focus on Christ. And our lifestyle should be an example of Christian living, regardless of where we're living. But our culture is an alien culture to Christ, to the Christians. We're driven by mere materialistic gain. We glorify the individual athlete, that sports deal is a configuration where you win or you're out, We're to stop that from a very small age. We have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We don't live for the blessings that God is willing to give us if we come to Christ in obedience to faith.
And you kind of stepped into next week's lesson a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry.
At the end of chapter 24 is a parable, and then there are 4 more parables or stories, or 3 more in chapter 25 that we're going to start with next week. And what he's going to start talking about with them is, okay, I've warned you, I've told you what's going to happen. And they didn't get the idea that he was saying, I know for a fact that this is going to happen. They didn't know, they didn't understand, they didn't realize that he was predicting the future. They realized it after the fact when it happened. So he's giving them all these warnings, and then he's going to go into, when we get into next week, he's going to start telling them how they're supposed to do it. Like you said, what they're supposed to do. And I'm going to say something next week about participation trophies. Jesus isn't going to come and give us participation trophies. He's not going to say, well, you came every Sunday, come on up and get your trophy. It's not going to be that way.
Oh, it is.
You wish.
I wouldn't really get to see all the folks who be in heaven.
No, there's going to be some judgment though.
What kind of an impact do you reckon social media is making throughout the world as far as Christianity? Is it reaching a lot of countries that otherwise it wouldn't? Like Facebook and that stuff.
Well, like anything else in the world, that there is good to it,
Yeah, well,
and there's bad to it. And
obviously, yeah.
I know for a fact that when I was in Southeast Asia in 1968, and Nora's aunt was sending me Bible study lessons. That wasn't really, it was distance learning in that they had to mail it over there, but there's, now we're doing things with technology that equal that had an impact. And so there are things like that are having an impact. Facebook and stuff like that. And I think we all can agree that if you want to gossip or find out what's happening to everybody, or want to brag about yourself or whatever, then yeah, that's good. But I have yet on Facebook to see a whole lot of stuff that was solid Christian teaching. There's some people out there, not a lot.
Yeah.
So yes, ma'am.
It depends.
It does.
It depends on who your friends are, who your relatives are, and it depends what you send. So if you're gonna trash it all up, then you're gonna get trash back.
Right.
But every day I get 3 or 4, 5 really neat sayings. A lot of them are Bible verses. My brother-in-law sends me ex-brother-in-law, but anyway, he sends me verses every day. I just think it depends on what you're looking for.
Well, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, when you started to ask that question, I said, there's good and bad in both of them.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously, there's a lot of bad stuff on, that type of social media.
I know.
But even the good stuff,
Talking about
It's
this,
like the garden of good and evil.
yeah. But even the good stuff that comes through, unless I already have the basic knowledge of Christ and what I'm supposed to be doing, then it probably wouldn't mean a whole lot to somebody that wasn't looking for that.
I could delay this a whole lot longer than I probably should. Even the people that are sending out the scriptures aren't necessarily, they're either taking them out of, a lot of people take them out of context and use them for whatever they want to say. I've even seen people use scriptures to put people down, you know, when they fight back with somebody. And so you can throw a scripture out there, but don't not use it accurately or within context or anything. So, yeah, now we're in a whole other, this is a whole other series.
Nobody should have mentioned Facebook.
We got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Well, you know, the thing about false Christs and false prophets, there's a bunch of them.
Yes. Let's look at verse 26. I was looking for this while you were talking. So if anyone tells you, there he is out in the desert, do not go out. Or he is here in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Now, at that time, the Son of Man will appear in the sky and all nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds from one end of the heavens to the other. Then he gives a lesson about the fig tree and the almond tree. And in case you don't know, in the spring, the almond tree would be the first of those 2 to bloom. They get its leaves and go through its growing cycle. And then the fig tree later. Have you been to the Holy Land? No? Okay, I thought you did. But that's what happens. And he's telling them that story there because they'll know that. They'll know that when they see the almond tree blossom, there's still, when the fig tree is going to blossom, then they know that it's going to be the end because the beginning of the end, that's what's going to happen. He's letting them know, and I think this is a beautiful set of verses here. We're describing him coming. It's not only going to be a visual thing, it's going to be an audible thing. It's going to be something with trumpets and noise, and it's going to be something that's going to, and what he's describing there, the glory and everything else. I mean, I'm going to sound like a heretic here now, so listen very carefully. We do spend a lot of time with the cross, and we show that, and we talk about how glorious that is. But when you read this, that's gonna overshadow that, I think. That people say, well, I wish I could have seen Jesus rise from the tomb. You wait till that happens. That is going to be something to visualize. So what he's doing right now is he's setting them up. He told them, I want you to be a disciple. Now, you ask for a sign, there's not going to be one. Be a disciple. There's going to be problems, but be a disciple. Now he's going to tell them how to be the disciple. As we look at the next session. I'm sorry I didn't give you a whole lot of chance to talk. I'll do better next time.
Good stuff, good.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here, and I know I had big shoes to fill after Sean came in here last week, so maybe I can stand, lick his boots or something. Appreciate it. Have a good week.